So I want you to imagine that you are running in a dream. You know that feeling?
Oh, yeah. The worst.
Right. Your legs weigh like 1,000 pounds. You are trying with every ounce of your being to sprint, but you're barely moving.
Yeah.
And you feel this agonizing, completely paralyzing disconnect between what your brain desperately wants to do and what your physical body can actually execute.
It's basically the ultimate anxiety nightmare because neurologically speaking, your motor cortex is firing off all the signals, right? The intention is crystal clear, but the execution mechanism is just completely stalled out. You are trapped in that weird gap between thought and action.
And that exact feeling, that terrifying high-speed paralysis, is precisely what happens neurologically when you try to speak a new language and just, completely freeze up.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you're listening to this right now, chances are you already know the grammar rules. You probably spent hundreds of hours on those little language apps.
Right, tapping the buttons.
Exactly. You can read a complex article, you can watch a movie and understand a native speaker perfectly.
Yeah.
But if you were dropped into a bustling coffee shop in London today, and the barista asked you a slightly unexpected question like, I don't know, could you joke back? Or would your brain just lock down?
Throwing you into that chaotic loop?
Yeah, that desperate loop of translating back and forth in your head while you just stare blankly at a blueberry muffin.
It's an incredibly discouraging phenomenon, and honestly, it happens to almost everyone. Because intellectually, you possess the data.
Right.
You have the vocabulary words stored away in your mental archives. But the retrieval process, accessing that database in real time under social pressure, that requires an entirely different neural pathway than the one you use to just passively read a textbook.
Which is such a wild distinction to make.
It really is. We mistakenly treat language learning as the accumulation of facts, when in reality, functional fluency is much, much closer to training muscle memory for a sport.
So today, our mission is to build that muscle memory. We're going to completely dismantle that internal translation loop.
Yes.
The goal of today's deep dive is to equip you with a completely new toolkit to train your brain to actually physically think directly in a target language. We really want to turn your mundane, everyday routine into a high-intensity immersion zone.
Which is a profound transition to make. I mean, we are moving away from treating English as this academic subject that you study at a desk for an hour a day.
Which never really works long-term anyway.
Exactly. And we're transforming it into the active operating system that you use to process your daily life.
And we have an incredible stack of material to pull this off today. We are diving into these highly practical, actionable blueprints from platforms like 51 Talk, Love English Lab, and Rachel's English.
Yeah.
But we are not just going to give you a list of quick tips and tricks.
No, we need the science.
Right. We are going to back up every single method with rigorous, peer-reviewed academic studies. We have this fascinating data out of Thailand, Iran, and a brilliant study from Russia that fundamentally flip how I view the psychology of language acquisition entirely.
Because the objective isn't just to force you to work harder or, stare at flashcards until your eyes bleed.
Please don't do that.
Right. The objective is to work in alignment with how the human brain actually acquires, processes, and automates new information.
So how do we actually bypass that mental traffic jam? I mean, to achieve real-time fluency, we have to look at what is actually happening in that split second of panic. We have to dismantle that translation delay.
And that translation delay is the absolute enemy of fluency.
Right.
If we look at the insights from Rachel's English, we really have to break down the sheer mechanics and timeline of a typical natural conversation. Let's say someone asks you a question. If you first receive that auditory input and process it in your native language, then you formulate your clever response in your native language, mentally translate that response word by word into English.
Which takes forever.
Right. And then you run a quick internal grammar check to make sure you didn't mess up the verb tense, and then finally trigger your vocal cords to speak.
The window is completely gone. I mean, the conversation has already moved on.
Yeah.
The other person's already talking about the weather. Or worse, they're just staring at you.
Yeah.
Waiting.
Awkward silence.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that silence just spikes your cortisol, making it literally even harder to retrieve the words you need.
Precisely. By the time you are ready to deliver your perfectly translated, grammatically flawless sentence, it is entirely irrelevant.
Yeah.
The fastest, most natural conversations happen when you eliminate that middle step entirely.
You just have to bypass it.
You have to stop translating and start thinking directly in target language, even if those initial thoughts feel incredibly simplistic or, almost childlike compared to your actual native intelligence.
Which brings us to a concept highlighted by 51 Talk that I am just absolutely obsessed with because it is so immediate. Like you can literally start doing this the second this deep dive ends.
They call it the vlogger method.
Yes, the vlogger method.
And it is exactly what it sounds like. You start narrating your daily, boring, mundane chores out loud in English as if you are this highly enthusiastic vlogger talking to an imaginary audience.
Right.
So you're standing in your kitchen and you just say out loud, I'm cutting these vegetables for my lunch today. The knife is sharp. The tomatoes are red.
It sounds incredibly simple, almost deceptively so. And frankly, for a lot of adults, it feels incredibly awkward at first.
Oh, I feel like an absolute crazy person when I do this. It is totally awkward. I like to compare it to being a sports commentator of your own deeply uninteresting life.
That's a great way to put it.
Right, like he's opening the fridge, he's reaching for the milk, oh no, the carton is empty, a devastating turn of events for his morning coffee.
But that awkwardness is actually a sign of cognitive friction, which means it is working.
Yeah. What's fascinating here is what the vlogger method reveals about your brain's unique language map.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Well, when you study from a traditional curriculum, you are learning the vocabulary that a textbook author sitting in an office somewhere decided was important.
Right.
You learn how to order a ticket at a train station or how to debate the global economy.
Sure.
But when you are forced to narrate your actual physical immediate reality, your own kitchen, your own morning commute, you immediately slam into your own personal vocabulary gaps.
Wait, that is such a good point. You don't realize you lack the vocabulary for your actual life until you try to narrate it.
Exactly.
Like you might have this incredible vocabulary for your specific corporate job. You can talk about synergy and Q3 deliverables in English flawlessly. But then you go to make breakfast and you realize you have absolutely zero idea how to say the word for spatula or kettle or like the junk drawer.
Exactly. You discover the words you actually need to navigate your unique world. The vlogger method forces the brain to stay locked in English mode, but more importantly, it highlights the highly practical, everyday vocabulary that is almost always skipped in formal education.
Wow. Yeah.
Yet it's entirely necessary for functional fluency. You are localizing your language learning to your immediate environment. You are basically building a lexicon of survival for your own life.
Okay, so talking gear to tomatoes is great, but let's put some real structure around this. We can't just walk around narrating our lives 24/7.
Yeah.
I mean, we have jobs, we have families who will think we've completely lost our minds.
Right. They will definitely judge you.
Oh, 100%. So we turn to this brilliant, highly structured framework from Love English Lab. They propose a dedicated 30-minute daily mental shift. Just 30 minutes.
And the core philosophy of this 30-minute window is absolutely crucial for listeners to grasp. The goal is not to think deep, philosophical, complex thoughts.
Right. If you wake up and try to mentally translate a heavy existential thought like, I'm deeply concerned about whether my future career trajectory will improve if I cannot express myself clearly in this foreign language, your brain is just going to short circuit.
It is way too heavy. The cognitive load is just massive.
Instead, the goal is to master available, boring, highly repeatable English. You want to find the absolute simplest path to the core meaning.
Because boring is repeatable, and repeatable becomes automatic, and automatic is fluency.
Yes. I love that. So Loving This Lab breaks this 30 minutes down into 6 5-minute blocks. And I want to spend some real time on this because it is so incredibly actionable.
Let's do it.
Let's walk through this routine, imagining a learner, let's call him Daniel, waking up in the morning.
Okay, so the first 5 minutes, from minute 1 to minute 5, are dedicated entirely to noticing. This is purely observational phase.
So Daniel wakes up, the alarm goes off, and instead of grabbing his phone and immediately scrolling through social media, reading the news in his native language, he gives his brain one quiet, incredibly simple job.
Right.
He just looks around his bedroom and he names what he sees. Bed, phone, window, blanket, shirt. And then he turns those single nouns into the simplest possible sentences. The chair is near the window. My phone is on the desk. My shoes are by the door.
And if we look at the cognitive science behind this, it is a brilliant warm-up mechanism. It is not demanding at all. You're not trying to conjugate complex verbs or recall abstract concepts.
Right, no heavy lifting.
Exactly. You are simply training the mind to connect the target language English with the raw visual stimuli that your eyes are already taking in. You are establishing the physical environment as an English-speaking zone before the stress of the day even begins.
Okay, then minutes 6 to 10 transition from noticing to action. Now, Daniel is physically getting out of bed. He narrates his own movements as they actually happen.
Yeah.
I am getting up. I am washing my face. I'm brushing my teeth. I am choosing a blue shirt. I am making breakfast.
And the immense power of this specific 5-minute block lies in the daily repetition of the routine.
Because it's the exact same stuff every day.
Right. You brush your teeth every single morning. You make coffee every single morning. If you consciously think the phrase, I'm brushing my teeth every single morning for 2 weeks straight, that phrase eventually bypasses the translation phase entirely in your brain.
Oh, wow.
You no longer think the thought in your native language and translate it. The action of brushing your teeth becomes intrinsically linked to the English phrase. It becomes an automatic, hardwired mental habit.
Okay, so we've noticed the room, we've narrated our actions. Minutes 11 to 15 move into planning. Now we are shifting from the present tense to projecting into the future. So Daniel is eating his breakfast and he thinks, I need to answer my boss's email. I have a team meeting at 10 o'clock. I should buy groceries after work.
Notice the deliberate, gradual scaling of cognitive complexity here. We moved from static objects to present physical actions to future abstract intentions.
It's building on itself.
Exactly. This block trains the brain to organize life, schedule events, and prioritize tasks using the target language. You're essentially proving to your brain that English is a functional tool for managing your reality.
Then we had a really interesting block. Minutes 16 to 20 are focused on feeling. And I can imagine this being super tricky for a lot of people because emotions are deeply nuanced.
They are.
And we usually only have the vocabulary for our deepest feelings in our mother tongue.
It is definitely tricky, but the rule from Love English Lab remains exactly the same. Keep it brutally simple. You do not need to articulate the profound depths of your existential angst.
Save that for therapy, right?
Yeah, exactly. You just need to label the baseline emotion.
So, I feel calm. I feel nervous about my meeting. I feel tired. I feel a little stressed today, but I can handle it.
This is perhaps the most vital step of the entire 30-minute routine, because language is intrinsically deeply tied to our emotional state.
Okay.
If you only ever use a second language to talk about pivot tables or academic theories or ordering coffee, the language will always feel slightly alien and robotic to you. It will lack a soul.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right? By gently naming your own emotions in English, you humanize the language.
Yep.
You teach your nervous system that English is a safe, valid vehicle for expressing your personal internal state.
That is fascinating. You're basically emotionally bonding with the vocabulary.
Exactly.
Okay, so minutes 21 to 25 move into explaining. And this is where we introduce the magic bridge word. Because this word single-handedly connects two simple, basic ideas into a slightly more complex, mature thought.
Yes.
Like, I am tired because I slept late. I am nervous because I have a big presentation.
The word because is incredibly powerful for intermediate learners. It allows you to literally double your sentence length and show logical flow without requiring any advanced grammatical structures.
You sound so much more fluent instantly.
You really do. You are essentially explaining your own reality, justifying your feelings or actions to yourself. It forces you to connect cause and effect in the target language.
And finally, minutes 26 to 30 are for review. You are acknowledging the effort. You think to yourself, I practiced for 30 minutes. I used simple sentences. I remembered the word for spatula today.
And this final reflection is not just self-congratulatory fluff, okay? It is neurologically necessary.
Really? How so?
The human brain requires evidence of progress to form and sustain a habit. If you end a study session solely focused on the 50 words you couldn't remember, you will generate a feeling of defeat, and your brain will actively resist doing the exercise tomorrow.
Oh, man. I've definitely done that.
We all have. But if you end by explicitly acknowledging the successful effort, you build a loop of positive reinforcement.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here for a second, because I know exactly what it feels like to try something like this. I can hear a listener right now saying, this all sounds lovely for Daniel. But what if I try to do this tomorrow morning? I look at my coffee cup and my brain absolutely, totally flatlines.
It happens.
Right. What if I have genuinely zero idea what to say? I can't even think of the word for cup, and the panic just sets in.
That is a very common, very real hurdle.
Yeah.
And the solution provided in the source material is brilliantly counterintuitive. If you freeze, your immediate instincts will be to break the rule, revert to your native language, and think, oh no, I forgot the word, I'm terrible at this.
Yep, that's exactly what happens.
You cannot do that. You must think that exact panicked thought in English.
Wait, literally just think, I don't know in English.
Exactly. Think, I don't know. Think, I'm not sure what to say right now. Think, I completely forgot the word. Even these simple metacognitive thoughts keep your brain operating within the target language infrastructure.
Oh, wow.
The goal of this 30-minute window is contact time with the language, not perfection. Every single time your mind tries to slip back into the comfortable slippers of your native language, you gently, firmly guide it back. English, English, English. It is an exercise in mental focus and discipline just as much as it is an exercise in vocabulary.
It's about building a small, fenced-in, safe English space inside your normal life. You don't need to force-feed yourself 30 minutes of completely new, highly complex vocabulary every day. You just need 30 minutes of raw contact time with the language you already possess, applying it to the reality you are actually living.
And this internal vlogger method is incredibly powerful. But as you alluded to earlier, there is a massive flaw in this plan if we stop here.
Right.
It relies almost entirely on willpower.
And willpower depletes.
Yeah.
Faster than we'd like to admit.
Exactly. The minute you step out of your bedroom, your entire physical and digital world is screaming at you in your native language. If we rely solely on internal discipline, we will eventually exhaust ourselves. So we have to transition from merely building internal mental habits to physically engineering our living spaces.
Okay, let's get into that.
We have to manipulate our environment so that using English isn't a choice we have to actively make. It becomes an unavoidable necessity.
Which brings us to digital ecosystem engineering. I love this concept from 51 Talk. Think about it. We spend hours and hours every single day staring at glowing rectangles. Those screens are our primary interface with the world.
They really are.
So they need to become our most aggressive teachers. The advice here is to go into the settings of your smartphone, your laptop, your tablet, and your smart home devices, like your Alexa, your Google Home, and aggressively, permanently swap the operating system to English.
Now, this is a bold move for many learners. It induces a lot of hesitation.
Oh, absolutely. I've recommended this to friends, and they always panic. They're like, wait, changing my whole phone OS, what if I accidentally delete all my photos? What if I can't figure out how to turn off my alarm?
But that exact friction, that moment of panic, is the point. It forces a mechanism called immediate retrieval.
Okay, break that down.
Think about the sheer volume of micro-interactions you have with your phone every day. You set alarms, you check the weather radar, you navigate complex settings menus, you read push notifications.
Dozens of times a day.
Right. If all of that infrastructure is suddenly in English, you are forcing your brain to process functional, highly technical vocabulary dozens, maybe hundreds of times a day.
You want to know if it's going to rain? You have to ask your smart speaker in English. You want to set a timer so you don't burn your pasta. You have to do it in English.
Exactly.
51 Talk actually estimates that just by making this one digital switch for a single week, you adapt to and master over 200 technical and functional English terms, simply because you have to in order to survive your digital day.
It creates a necessity-driven learning environment. You aren't sitting at a desk studying a flashcard with the word settings or alarm on it. You are actively using those words as tools to accomplish a real-world task.
Which changes everything.
Right. That embeds the vocabulary on a much deeper, more permanent level than rote memorization ever could.
And we can take this engineering out of the digital world and into the physical world with something called realia mapping. Now, if you've ever taken a beginner language class, you've heard of putting sticky notes on things around your house, right?
Oh, classic.
Yeah, you write the word refrigerator on a yellow Post-it note and you slap it on the fridge door.
Yes, it is the classic ubiquitous beginner technique. But the methodology we're looking at elevates this concept significantly, making it far more cognitively effective for intermediate and advanced learners.
Because just labeling the object is too passive. I mean, you walk past a note that says fridge 100 times, and by day 3, your brain just filters it out as visual noise.
Exactly, it becomes invisible.
So the elevated advice here is to use what linguists call lexical chunks. Instead of a static note that just says refrigerator, you write an entire functional, actionable phrase. You write, I need to grab something from the refrigerator. Or on your coffee maker, you don't write coffee machine. You write, I'm going to brew a fresh cup of coffee.
This is a vital distinction, and it fundamentally changes how the brain maps the vocabulary.
How so?
When you just see the isolated noun refrigerator, your brain almost always still links the physical object primarily to your native language word. It just sees the English word refrigerator as a secondary translation floating on top of it.
Ah, right.
But when you use an actionable lexical chunk, you create an immediate, dynamic, visual, auditory connection to a physical behavior.
Oh, I see. So the brain stops thinking, this tall, cold box equals refrigerator. It starts thinking, when I physically stand in front of this machine, pull the handle and look inside, the action I am performing is grabbing something from the refrigerator.
Precisely. You are mapping the language directly to the target action, entirely bypassing the native language noun translation. You are turning every movement through your home, every interaction with an object, into an active, context-rich English drill.
And we can even apply this aggressive, active mindset to how we relax. We all love watching TV shows or movies to practice listening. It's everyone's favorite excuse to watch Netflix. I'm studying.
Right. The ultimate excuse.
But let's be honest, often it is just passive entertainment. We leave the subtitles on in our native language, we zone out, and we let the English wash over us like background noise. 51 Talk recommends a fantastic drill to fix this called Pause and Predict.
This completely transforms passive entertainment into a high-intensity, active study session. The methodology is straightforward but extremely demanding. When you are watching a show in English, you literally hit the pause button on your remote right after a character finishes the sentence.
And then what? You just repeat it.
You can echo it, mimicking their exact intonation and accent to practice muscle memory. That's good. But the more advanced version is to try and predict how the other character in the scene is going to respond before you hit play again.
Oh, that is brilliant. So if character A says, I can't believe you lied to me, you hit pause and you have to instantly generate the response. Like, I'm sorry, I was just trying to protect you.
Exactly. By forcing yourself to predict the response, you are actively engaging with the context of the scene, the emotional stakes, the slang, and the natural rapid-fire flow of the conversation.
You're fully in it.
You aren't just passively receiving auditory input. You are actively testing your understanding of how the language works in real-time, high-context scenarios.
It is basically like shadowboxing with the actors on screen.
Yeah.
You are sparring with the dialogue. And speaking of interacting, you don't actually need to leave your house or talk to your television to find real native speakers to practice with. Joining interest-based digital communities is a massive part of this environmental engineering.
Social immersion is absolutely vital for long-term retention. You need to find where native speakers are naturally congregating online platforms like Discord, Reddit, or highly specialized hobby forums.
Right.
If you are passionate about vintage film photography, you need to join an English-speaking photography Discord. If you love building custom mechanical keyboards, find the English subreddit for it.
But the crucial caveat here is you cannot just be a lurker. You can't just read the posts. You have to get in the mix.
You have to output.
Yes. You have to leave comments, ask stupid questions, get into a friendly argument about which camera lens is objectively better, because this exposes you to how people actually speak in the year 2026. You learn the current internet slang, the weird abbreviations, the highly specific natural phrasing that a formal textbook written 10 years ago will never ever teach you.
And beyond the vocabulary, it provides real-world, immediate social feedback.
Which is huge.
It is. If you post a joke in English on a forum and 3 native speakers respond with laughing emojis or say, lol, you have successfully communicated nuance, timing, and humor in a second language. That is incredibly validating.
Yeah, that's real connection.
That builds a kind of deep internal confidence that a perfect score on a grammar quiz simply cannot replicate.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time talking about these highly practical habits. We are narrating our morning coffee. We are completely overhauling our digital ecosystem. We are shadowboxing with Netflix. And we are arguing about camera lenses on Reddit. We are outputting language constantly. But I want to pause here and ask the skeptical question.
Sure.
Why does this active output work so much better than just sitting quietly in a library and passively reading a really good grammar textbook? Is there actual hard data proving this? Let's look at the science.
This requires us to look at the foundational theories of language acquisition, and specifically, the decades-long academic debate between the value of input versus output. For a very long time, the dominant theory in linguistics was Stephen Krashen's input hypothesis. Creation argued passionately that the primary, perhaps the only way we truly acquire language is by receiving what he called comprehensible input that is just slightly above our current level of competence. This is widely referred to in academia as the I+1 theory.
Okay, let's break that down, meaning if my current language level is I need to be reading books or listening to audio that is just a little bit challenging, the +1, so that I am stretched, but I can still grasp the overall meaning through context.
Correct. The foundational idea was that if you just flood the learner with a massive, overwhelming amount of understandable listening and reading material, the brain will naturally sort out the grammar and fluency will eventually emerge on its own.
Wait, so under that theory, is just reading a ton of English books or listening to English audio like this very deep dive you're listening to right now, is that supposed to be enough to actually learn how to speak a language fluently?
According to strict interpretations of Cretion, yes. But if we connect this to the bigger picture and look at more recent research and real-world outcomes, we find a critical flaw.
Which is?
Input is absolutely necessary. You obviously cannot output what you have never heard, but it is not sufficient on its own for true fluency. To illustrate exactly why, let's look at a fascinating case study from a qualitative research paper. The subject of the study is a woman named Emily, a 24-year-old Chinese ESL learner.
Right. Emily's story is so relatable. She had studied English for 12 years in China. 12 years. And her education was heavily, almost exclusively, focused on input. She read complex textbooks, she listened to teachers' lectures, she memorized vocabulary lists.
Right.
But when she finally moved to Sydney, Australia, to live and study in a fully English environment, she found herself completely struggling.
She had 12 years of academic study under her belt, but when faced with complex university-level reading or trying to participate in real-world, fast-paced conversations in Sydney, she felt her vocabulary capacity was totally insufficient.
Which must have been so frustrating.
Beyond frustrating. She specifically noted in the study that she was forgetting new words she encountered almost as quickly as she looked them up in the dictionary. The input simply was not sticking.
This is where Meryl Swain's output hypothesis enters the chat and changes everything.
Exactly.
Swain was observing learners in French immersion programs in Canada. These students were hearing French all day long from their teachers. They were getting massive, continuous amounts of comprehensible input. But Swain noticed that their own spoken grammar and their ability to actively recall vocabulary remained stagnant.
They sounded clunky.
Yeah. Swain argued that to truly deeply acquire a language, learners must be pushed to actually produce it. They must experience what she termed pushed output.
And this concept of pushed output was exactly Emily's breakthrough in Sydney. It wasn't until she was forced into small breakout rooms during her master's degree classes, where she had to actively negotiate meaning with her peers, defend her ideas, and formulate complex arguments orally, that the language finally started to click.
But why? What is physically happening in the brain when you speak that doesn't happen when you read?
Swain explains that output forces a completely different, much more demanding kind of cognitive work called syntactic processing. When you are just reading a book or listening to a podcast, you are engaging in semantic processing. You can often guess the entire meaning of a sentence purely from the context and recognizing 2 or 3 key vocabulary words.
I do this all the time. If I'm reading an article in Spanish and I recognize the word for dog, bite, and man, my brain just fills in the rest. The dog bit the man.
Right.
I don't actually need to know how the past tense verb is conjugated or what the preposition is to get the point and keep reading. I am essentially just skimming the nouns and faking the rest.
Exactly. You are successfully extracting meaning without actually understanding the architecture of the language. But when you have to speak or when you have to write an essay, you cannot fake it. You cannot just throw 3 nouns at someone and hope they guess the context.
It doesn't work that way.
No, you have to put the words in the exact right order. You have to choose the correct verb tense. You have to figure out the syntax. Pushed output forces syntactic processing.
You are forced to test your internal subconscious hypotheses about how the language actually works. When Emily was forced to write complex IELTS essays, she couldn't just guess. She had to actively dive into her memory, retrieve the specific words, and string them together accurately.
Yes.
And that intense cognitive effort embedded those words in her memory far better than passively reading them 100 times ever did.
Pushed output forces you to move from being a passive consumer of a language to an active architect of it.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
But let's be real for a second. Pushed output, being forced to speak when you aren't ready, is utterly terrifying. It is emotionally exhausting.
Exhausting, yeah.
Which brings us to a really fascinating study from Indonesia that directly tackles this emotional barrier.
This study was conducted at an SMK, which is a vocational high school in Jakarta. It was a classroom action research project involving 20 first-grade students. And the researchers made a crucial observation right at the beginning. They identified that these students were not failing their speaking tests because they lacked the intellectual ability or the vocabulary.
Right.
They were failing because they were paralyzed by fear.
They were nervous. They were terrified of using incorrect grammar and sounding stupid in front of their peers. They were deeply reluctant to try and create original sentences. They lacked confidence. And the researchers realized that this lack of confidence wasn't just a side effect. It was the root cause of the academic failure.
So the researchers implemented a self-talk strategy. This is actually very similar in practice to the vlogger method we discussed earlier. They essentially trained the students to use intentional, internal, and out-loud self-talk, not just to practice English vocabulary, but specifically to manage and regulate their own anxiety about speaking.
Wait, let me make sure I understand this. They were using English self-talk to calm themselves down about having to speak English.
Exactly. It operates as a closed loop. They used the language to regulate their fear of the language. And they tracked this through 3 distinct cycles of action research.
Now, the data tracking this emotional and academic shift is absolutely remarkable. Let's look at the numbers. In the first cycle, when the students were just starting to implement this self-talk strategy, it was rough. They were clumsy, they were confused by the method, and the pass rate on their speaking test reflected that. It was a dismal 20%.
Only 4 out of the 20 students passed the benchmark.
But the researchers didn't stop. They kept pushing the output. They kept forcing the self-talk. By cycle 2, as the students got slightly more used to speaking their thoughts out loud and using that self-talk to soothe their nerves before speaking to a partner, the pass rate jumped to 35%.
And then we look at the climax of the study in cycle 3. After repeatedly, consistently practicing this pushed, self-directed output, the students' anxiety levels visibly plummeted, and the pass rate on the speaking test skyrocketed to 75%.
15 out of 20 students passed, from 20% to 75%, just by forcing self-talk. That is a massive, undeniable leap. And what I love about this study is that it scientifically proves that confidence isn't just some vague, nice, warm feeling you hope to eventually have one day.
Exactly.
Confidence is a highly measurable, actionable academic metric. The self-talk forced the output. The output demystified the process and built the confidence. And that new confidence resulted in massive, actual fluency improvements.
It clearly demonstrates that the struggle of producing the language, while incredibly emotionally taxing and uncomfortable at first, is the exact mechanism that builds the competence. You cannot skip the uncomfortable phase.
And this realization, this acute, sometimes agonizing awareness of what you can't say when you are forced to speak or write, leads us to perhaps the most fascinating psychological concept of this entire deep dive. It is a trigger called noticing the gap. And the research on this completely, fundamentally flips traditional teaching on its head.
This brings us to a highly compelling study conducted at the Linguistics University of Nizhny Novgorod in Russia. The subjects were 30 translation students. And the researchers wanted to figure out how to strengthen the neural link between the students' native Russian and their target language, which was English, as quickly and permanently as possible.
Now, normally, if I want to teach you 10 new English vocabulary words, I give you a text in English, right? I let you read it. You see the new words highlighted in context. Maybe I explain what they mean, and I test you on them later. It's safe. It's logical. But these Russian researchers did the exact polar opposite.
They employed the noticing hypothesis, originally developed by linguist Richard Schmidt. Instead of providing the English input first, they gave the students sentences written entirely in their native Russian.
Okay.
These sentences contain specific, complex concepts that would eventually require the new, unlearned target English vocabulary to translate accurately.
And then they forced the students to try and translate these Russian sentences into English before they had ever seen the English text. And crucially, they absolutely forbade them from using a dictionary.
They forced them into a state of blind output.
Okay, I have to push back here because this sounds incredibly cruel. Here's where it gets really interesting. Because you are deliberately setting these poor students up to fail.
Yes.
You are looking them in the eye and asking them to produce vocabulary that you know for a fact they have never learned. Why on earth would you make them struggle, sweat, and ultimately fail before just giving them the answers?
Because that deliberate, agonizing frustration is the entire point of the methodology. When a student tries to translate a thought and they search their brain and they realize they literally do not possess the vocabulary to express it, it creates a profound, highly uncomfortable cognitive gap.
They notice the hole.
Exactly. They become acutely, painfully aware of their own deficit. According to Schmidt's theory, this realization of failure triggers a state of hyper-focused attention.
It's like, okay, imagine you're trying to assemble a complex piece of IKEA furniture. You know how frustrating that is.
Oh, I hate it.
Right. You're putting the pieces together and suddenly you realize you are missing one very specific, weirdly shaped screw. You can't proceed without it.
Yeah.
Suddenly you aren't just casually looking at a pile of screws. You are highly motivated, intensely hyper-focused on finding exactly that one specific shape.
That is a perfect analogy. The gap creates the need. So after letting these translation students struggle and brainstorm and agonizingly fail to find the perfect English words for several minutes, the researchers then finally handed them the English text that contained the target vocabulary.
And because these students had just spent the last 10 minutes agonizing over how to express those exact specific concepts, they didn't just passively skim the English text like bored students. They devoured it. They were actively hunting for the answers to the puzzle they couldn't solve.
The gap in their knowledge made the subsequent input intensely, desperately meaningful. They noticed the new vocabulary in a profound way that they never, ever would have if the teacher had just handed them the text at the beginning of class.
And the results of engineering this deliberate struggle were massive. The researchers tested the students' translation speed and accuracy before this treatment and then after. The average performance time for retrieving the correct English vocabulary dropped from 397.5 seconds down to 265 seconds.
They shaved off over 2 minutes of hesitation, mental searching, and translation delay, precisely because the neural link had been forged so strongly in the fire of that initial struggle.
And there's one more statistical detail in this study that I want to highlight because I think it's actually the most important part. The standard deviation in the experimental group shrank dramatically.
Yeah.
It went from 75.8 down to 52.46.
Which is a highly significant statistical shift.
And what's really cool about that specific data point is what it means for a real-world classroom. The shrinking standard deviation means this wasn't just a case of the 3 smartest top-tier students pulling the class average up while everyone else floundered.
Right, it wasn't just the outliers.
Exactly. A smaller standard deviation means the scores clustered much closer together. The floor was raised for everybody. The intervention helped the struggling students just as much as the advanced ones. The entire class moved together as a more uniform, highly confident unit. The cognitive friction of the deliberate struggle directly led to faster, more reliable word retrieval across the board.
The struggle truly is the strategy. You have to manufacture the need before you provide the solution.
Okay, so we've run the gauntlet. We have forced the output. We have bravely noticed our agonizing gaps. We have hunted down the correct words to fill those gaps, and we have finally learned them. But how do we make sure they actually stay in our long-term memory? How do we fortify this new lexicon so we aren't just hunting for that exact same word again next Tuesday?
This brings us to a highly contested, passionately debated topic in language learning circles, the use of dictionaries. If you want to permanently retain vocabulary, the specific tools you use to look up words matter immensely. And we have a compelling, highly controlled study from Iran that explored this exact debate, involving 60 intermediate EFL learners.
They took these 60 students and divided them evenly into 2 groups. Both groups were given the exact same task. They had to learn 100 new words from a standard, well-known textbook called 504 Absolutely Essential Words, but they were given completely different tools to accomplish the task. One group was strictly only allowed to use bilingual dictionaries, so they were translating directly from English to Persian. The other group was forced to exclusively use monolingual dictionaries, English to English, like an Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary.
Now, the bilingual dictionary is what almost every single language learner naturally, instinctively reaches for. It is fast, it feels highly efficient, and it provides an immediate, soothing sense of security. You see an English word you don't know, you look it up, you get the exact Persian equivalent in half a second, and you move on with your reading.
Right. But I think of it exactly like using a GPS app on your phone when you are driving in a new city. You type in the destination, and the GPS gives you thoughtless, turn-by-turn directions. Turn left in 100 feet. It gets you to the destination, the meaning instantly. But because you were just blindly following the blue line on the screen, your brain completely checks out. You never actually learn the layout of the city. You don't learn how the roads connect.
Which means the next time you have to drive there without your phone, you are completely lost.
Exactly. Using a monolingual dictionary, on the other hand, you're like forcing yourself to pull over and read an old-school giant paper map. It takes way longer, is incredibly frustrating when you're in a rush, and it requires significantly more mental effort. But because you have to trace the route yourself, you are forced to look at the surrounding landscape. You learn the context of the city.
That is a brilliant analogy. And the data from the Iranian study definitively, aggressively backs this up. After 5 intense sessions of treatment, both groups took a post-test to see how many of the 100 words they actually retained. The group that used the fast, easy bilingual dictionary achieved a mean score of 13.16. The group that suffered through the monolingual dictionary achieved a mean score of 15.23.
And the researchers ran the numbers. An independent samples t-test showed a p-value of 0.005. For those who aren't data nerds, that means the difference is highly statistically significant. It was absolutely not a fluke. The monolingual group consistently, undeniably outperformed the bilingual group in long-term retention.
The researchers concluded exactly what your GPS analogy suggests. Bilingual dictionaries provide a false security of concrete, absolute answers. They encourage the brain to quickly translate the word, grab the native language meaning, and then immediately discard the English context.
Because you got what you wanted.
Right. Monolingual dictionaries, however, force the brain to remain trapped in the target language. To even understand the definition of the new word, you have to read a full sentence containing other English words. You are immediately exposed to synonyms, antonyms, and crucial grammatical context clues. It forces deeper cognitive processing, which leads directly to superior long-term memory retention.
So the hard truth is, delete the instant translation apps off your phone and suffer through the friction of the English-to-English dictionary. The pain pays off. And to wrap up this massive practical toolkit we've built today, let's look at how to actively practice retrieving these new hard-won words from your memory. Evidence-based education provides some excellent, highly actionable strategies for mastering what they call Tier 3 terminology.
Tier 3 words are those highly specific specialist words you absolutely need for advanced fluency in your particular field or interests. And as we've established, you cannot just look a word up once and expect to own it. You have to actively, repeatedly pull it out of your memory. Retrieval practice is essential.
They suggest several games, like vocabulary bingo or modifying a family game of Scrabble to only allow target vocabulary. But I want to bypass those and deep dive into the absolute most robust exercise they recommend, which is called the keyword spotlight.
This is a phenomenal cognitive exercise. You are essentially taking a single, difficult target word and attacking it from every possible neurological angle.
Let's say your target word is mitigate. You put mitigate under the spotlight. First, you have to provide the definition in English. Then you have to use it in a completely original sentence relevant to your life. But here's where it gets crazy. Step 3 is you literally have to draw a physical illustration of the word. You have to doodle a picture of mitigate. Why on earth are we drawing pictures?
Because drawing forces a process called dual coding. When you just read a word, you are only engaging the linguistic centers of your brain. But when you are forced to translate that abstract concept into a visual representation, you are simultaneously firing up the visual and spatial memory centers.
That's wild.
It is. You are literally anchoring the vocabulary word in 2 completely different locations in your brain. If the linguistic memory fails you under pressure, the visual memory acts as a backup generator to retrieve the concept.
That is incredible. So you define it, you use it, you draw it, then you link it to other related terms like reduce or alleviate, and finally you create a trivia question where mitigate is the answer. By the time you are done with the keyword spotlight, that word is practically tattooed on your brain.
It ensures that the word is no longer a fragile, isolated, floating memory, but is woven deeply and securely into a vast, interconnected web of related concepts. That is exactly how you build a resilient, ironclad lexicon that will not fail you when you are standing in that coffee shop in London.
So what does this all mean for you? Let's zoom out and summarize the ultimate game plan. If you are tired of freezing up, if you are exhausted from sprinting through waist-deep mud in your own head, here is your blueprint. Tomorrow morning, before you even look at a screen, start your 30-minute vlogger routine. Notice your room, narrate your breakfast, plan your day, feel your stress. When you finally pick up your phone, go into the settings and switch the OS to English. Start writing actionable, functional lexical chunks on sticky notes and put them on your fridge and your coffee maker. When you sit down to watch Netflix, don't just passively consume it. Pause it and predict the dialogue.
And above all else, you must embrace the uncomfortable, agonizing struggle of pushed output. Do not hide in the safety of passive reading. Force yourself to speak. Force yourself to notice the gaping holes in your vocabulary and delete your bilingual dictionary so you're forced to figure out the meanings in context. The friction is the only way forward.
It is a complete lifestyle shift. But before we sign off, we want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to mull over as you start talking to your tomatoes tomorrow morning. We spent this entire time talking about how to change your inner voice to a second language.
But we have to ask, what happens when you succeed? If our inner monologue is the lens through which we shape our perception of reality, how we process our deepest emotional states, and how we logically interact with the world around us, well, how might developing an entirely new, constant inner voice in a second language literally alter your personality? Does the English-speaking version of you process conflict or humor differently than the native-speaking version of you?
Does a new language literally build a fundamentally new version of you? It is something fascinating to explore on your own. Thank you so much for joining us for this custom-tailored deep dive. We've given you the blueprint, we have explained the science, and now it is entirely up to you to get out of the mud and start running. We'll see you next time.